Hello, friends, and welcome to another action-packed episode of the NintenGem's podcast, the podcast where we discuss Nintendo games both new and old and middle-aged. My name is Connor, and I am one of your hosts on this fine day, joined today by...
Brayden, hello!
What's up? Are we ever gonna... Do we need to do that every time? I feel like we've kind of been the same rotating cast for a minute now. You know what I mean?
You're not wrong, but in the famous words of Stan Lee, the late Stan Lee, every comic is somebody's first comic, and I so take that approach with the podcast.
Yeah, our podcast is somebody's first comic.
That's exactly right.
Huh. Fair enough.
So, you know, I that's my approach at least. So
I feel that.
And at the very least, I get to tell you my name again and again and again.
I guess a few more can't hurt. We've got a great episode planned for you all today. A few pretty recent releases.
That's right.
As of time of recording, reasonably recent releases.
Well, and that is just a flaw of the format of our podcast. Is like we really do want to be able to discuss these games fully. We don't want to give any kind of like half-baked analysis, and so like for these brand new games that we want to discuss, it takes time to beat them, obviously.
Sure.
And we don't get any, like, early copies or anything like that. Nintendo, hook us up.
Someday.
One day.
We're working up to it. But yeah, first up on the docket today, we have No More Heroes 3 for the Nintendo Switch.
Which is a pretty big deal for you, I gotta say. Like, I love to hear that it's out, and...
It's crazy that it's out. It's crazy that it exists.
Yeah.
It is bewildering.
I feel cool, like, knowing... just that the series exists and like that it has continued on. But that said, I know very little about the series, at least compared to you. I have not really played the games, and so you were definitely the one to take control of No More Heroes 3.
For sure. And it's tough because this is obviously at least the third entry. It's technically the fourth entry.
Sure.
In the series. We are at least 3 games into this pretty long-running series. The first No More Heroes game came out in 2007, in Japan at least. It came out in 2008 in everywhere else. Okay. But obviously there have only been a few games, but like just purely chronologically, like almost 15 years since the first game. That's crazy.
As we get into this discussion, I feel like you've kind of already described the No More Heroes series as like a legacy series, kind of in one of our more recent episodes. And so like, is that what you would consider to be true?
I think so. It was just last episode. It was when we were talking about Neo, The World Ends With You.
Right,
because Neo attempted to kind of be, or I mean, like from our discussion, I gathered that it was kind of attempted to be like a stylish hack and slash experience.
Yeah.
Which No More Heroes 3 has in spades, but we will get to. But yeah, with The World Ends With You being in a similar position where the first game came out well over a decade ago.
Right. On
an older legacy system. You know, there's several parallels. A system, like a handheld that was very, I don't know, for lack of a better term, gimmicky. Like very unique gameplay-wise, just inherently.
Sure.
Same for No More Heroes. Like the reason it was developed for the Wii was to take advantage of the Wii remote and of the motion controls. Was kind of one of its original gimmicks. But
sure.
Like I was saying earlier, it's tough because not only is this like at least the third game in this series, and this is such a legacy series as well. But the visionary behind it, the director of the No More Heroes series, is also just kind of has a career that needs to be explained and a reputation that needs precedings.
Interesting.
Suda51 or Suda51. Does that name mean anything to you? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely familiar.
Okay. He's very much like an auteur visionary type. Like he's directed notable games in the past, kind of like a Hideo Kojima figure.
Sure.
A very distinct style of direction in games. Suda51 because his name is Goichi Suda and Go-ichi. Go is 5 in Japanese and Ichi is 1, so 5-1, Suda51.
That's pretty cool.
Very cool that he just kind of earned that nickname. He's been running Grasshopper Manufacture, I believe, for quite a while now. I recall in our year-end recap this past year, go back and listen to that episode for a little tidbit on Killer 7.
Okay, yes.
He's the visionary behind that.
I didn't want to sound dumb, but like that was my guess.
And like he has like this whole kind of anthology of games at this point that are like kind of set in the same universe, sort of. They're insofar as like they all have similar visual styles, and they're all generally just like about assassins and hitmen, and by that I mean like people in suits that wield like huge katanas and are just like killing each other all the time. But yes, Killer 7 was like his kind of, I guess he directed games before that. Maybe I should have done more research. I forget if Flower, Sun, and Rain came out before that, but that was like kind of his opus at the time, and still kind of is. Amazing game, Killer 7 is.
Sure.
And that'll definitely be a game to talk about on the show someday. But that was 2005, I believe, and then in 2007 we got No More Heroes. And No More Heroes was mostly notable at the time, not just as being the next directorial project from Suda51 at the time, but also because it was being released exclusively on the Wii.
Yeah.
And it was a rated M game. Like a clearly very, and like overtly M, like
Grand Theft Auto kind of level crudeness, perhaps.
Definitely.
I think is what I remember it being billed, advertised as.
That's definitely true. And while Grand Theft Auto has had like a tendency since Grand Theft Auto 4 to kind of like be based in realism, like it's certainly crude on purpose, but like there's like a realism to its crudeness. It's not like No More Heroes plays the crudeness like way, way up and over the top for laughs. Like every sentence that Travis Touchdown, the protagonist, utters has the F word in it. He's dropping F-bombs all the time, and like the violence, the brutality is super stylized. Like anytime anyone gets a limb or a head hacked off, there's just a fountain of blood.
Yeah.
And just like Killer 7, all the art is like cel shaded. It's very, very, very stylish. The first game had very muted colors. It was pretty colorful, but it was all very, with the cel shading, it was all just like all colors were a little muted and earth toned. The first game was notable for being a very mature-oriented game on the Wii at a time when those were few and far in between,
right?
Especially back in the day.
Well, and let me ask, Killer 7, I know it was on GameCube, but it was multi-platform, correct?
It was after some time.
Okay.
It was initially GameCube exclusive for a time due to a deal with Capcom that Nintendo had at the time, but it did eventually come to PS2 and very recently came to PC.
Interesting.
In the past like year or so. Not only notable because it's a new mature game for the Wii, and not also because it's Suda51's follow-up to Killer 7 essentially.
Sure.
But it is also just a quality hack and slash game for the most part. The Grand Theft Auto comparison is not entirely inaccurate because it also has an open world, along with its gratuitous violence and crude sense of humor and kind of hyper surrealism. First game is at its core your kind of basic hack and slash character action game. You play as Travis Touchdown. You wield a beam katana, which is different than a lightsaber. Travis Touchdown being this kind of stereotypical otaku nerd. I also remember the last episode we recorded with Neo, you were asking if weeb was like an offensive term. Maybe, but weeb is the new otaku. Otaku meaning somebody that is like in over their heads obsessed with Japanese culture.
Sure.
Travis Touchdown lives in a crappy motel. Like he lives in a motel, and his apartment or like the room is lined with posters of like moe girls and like anime characters, and he has like piles and piles of professional wrestling VHSs.
Gotcha.
Like he's a turbo nerd. And he wins this beam katana from an online auction and just kind of decides that he's going to start aiming to be the #1 assassin in the world. Okay. After he obtains this beam katana, he accepts an invite to like a hit job. And then after that, he is wrapped up into the ranking battle for the top 10 spots on the UAA, or Universal Assassin Association, I believe. And so the premise of the original game of No More Heroes 1 is you are battling your way up the top 10 spots to #1 to be the #1 ranked assassin in the world.
Fun.
Very fun. Super fun.
It's a great, like, over-the-top kind of just foundation to start with.
Right.
I did think it was 100.
It's 10, so, and this is all appropriate because 3 essentially is like the same thing. It's the same structure.
Uh-huh.
So where there's in the original game, it is yes, those 10 fights are essentially the 10 boss fights in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And the boss fights are broken up by exploring this overworld, this town of Santa Destroy. That Travis lives in, and you essentially spend the time between these boss fights going around doing odd jobs in the form of like pedantic mini games, like lawn mowing or unclogging toilets or mining, just like random
video game trope.
Very much so. Yes, and also in the overworld are different like hit jobs, like minor hit jobs, like you accept missions to take down a wave of bad guys that are just like,
sure,
I don't know, just generic henchmen, and you earn money those ways.
Yeah, hack and slash side quests.
Pretty much, yeah. Just like a mission to mow down a wave of enemies.
Yeah.
And the first game definitely suffered because the regular enemies were super generic and like didn't have much variety whatsoever. Like there's like a sword guy and a gun guy, and that's kind of it. So it got a little monotonous, and also the open world was not necessarily interesting to explore.
Oh,
there just like wasn't much to it besides those side missions.
Was it just a city?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can ride your motorcycle around. You have this big, cool motorcycle. But that was pretty much it. You could the actual combat entailed regular hack and slash kind of thing. You have your beam katana, and you have like kind of a light attack and a heavy attack based on how you were holding the Wii remote. It would either be a high stance or a low stance.
Okay, and that I do remember getting into this a little bit too.
Yeah, and you would just tap A to attack. There are some nuances. You can dodge and block, and if you do like a perfect dodge, much like, I don't know, Breath of the Wild, time slows down and you can score a few hits.
Ooh, okay, cool.
When you kill an enemy, you get a prompt on the screen to swing your sword, swing the Wii remote a certain direction. And that's called like a killer slash, I think. And you do that and it does like a wide sweeping slash that like damages other enemies.
Cool.
Usually it's a horizontal one that'll
like finisher move.
Yeah, they're essentially, yeah, once you wear down your enemy enough, you can do a killer slash, and that will like chop their head off in the fountain of blood, and then it'll like kind of disperse the crowd of enemies around you.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It's this really organic flow of combat where you're landing hits on your enemy, you do an appropriately timed dodge, and then you use that slowdown to land more hits, and by that time they're stunned, or you have the opportunity to use killer slash to finish them off, and you move on to the next one. It's very, very satisfying. And what's more, if you do enough damage to a regular enemy or a boss, they can get stunned, and then you can grab them to do a pro wrestling move on them.
Yeah.
Which is a similar thing. You have to do a motion with your Wii remote and your nunchuck, like a double kind of.
Follow the direction on the screen and...
Yeah, I'm physically using my hands to demonstrate this. The listeners can't see. But yes, so it used the Wii remote in relatively innovative ways that were, I think, supplementary to the gameplay. Like you didn't have to like swing your Wii remote around nonsensically the whole time to swipe your sword. But it was like appropriate that it was there in the limited capacity that it was. Because otherwise you're just like tapping the button.
Right.
One more cool nuance to the combat was that whenever you do one of these killer slashes, a little roulette appears on the screen. And the roulette can grant you like some special benefits. It can make you like super fast, or add to your attack, or fill up your HP. It's just completely random.
But they're all buffs? Or
yes.
Are there like nerfs in there too?
The first one, I don't think there are any nerfs. I don't think there's any negative effects.
Because it's a reward for a combo or something like that, right?
Right. And there's also like a tension gauge, which is the same thing, essentially. It just like follows your combo.
Okay.
And the higher the combo score you get, the more damage you're doing, the longer your combos. It's all pretty standard action game stuff.
Yeah.
But it's wrapped in like this super stylish presentation. Very like visceral presentation too. Like this kind of... Especially for the time, 2007, like this kind of like level of bloodshed and like over the top bloodshed was kind of reserved for something like God of War.
Sure.
Something a little more grittier.
Well, and it was funny, as you were just talking there, I was looking up the release date for Prototype, which in my mind is a very high bar for like hack and slash action games, both on like the gore level, as well as like just the fun and like over the top level, the scale of the fights you'd get into. And Prototype came out in 2009.
Yeah.
So No More Heroes predated it a bit. And so it's, there's no apt comparison necessarily there, but God of War, Prototype, Bayonetta is kind of, I don't know,
Bayonetta is not quite as like abjectly graphic in terms of its violence, I don't think. Especially because it's generally not towards like, I don't know, humans. Like it's not like blood and guts and mortals. It's kind of a little higher.
Aliens and demons type thing.
Exactly. But yeah, and it certainly, it can't be overstated how over the top No More Heroes is too. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, God of War is over the top in its presentation, obviously, because it's big, huge Greek gods.
Right.
But they're still, like, humanistic and they bleed. But No More Heroes is full of gamer references, in-jokes. Travis Touchdown is a cringy to watch because he's an otaku. And he just, like, fumbles around women.
How much, like, American play is there? Because he is an American, right? Like, thus the Travis Touchdown, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's just full of kind of, like, American buzzwords and, like, kind of tropes and jokes and poking fun at, like, the American lifestyle? I don't know.
That's certainly true, and certainly something that's harder for me to reach after playing the third one.
Okay.
And I'll get to that.
Okay.
But, yeah, Suda51 is known for addressing and poking fun at American social issues. Like, Killer 7 is a pastiche of a Japanese person's understanding of Americana.
Sure.
In a lot of ways. Like, it's about global conspiracies, the government. It's very political. Yeah. This one is a little more, the first No More Heroes is a little more social in that regard. Like, it has a lot of social commentary. Mm-hmm. But again, it's hard for me to remember that because the third one is more like nerd culture commentary and is a lot less grounded in like reality and what's going on.
Interesting.
And that's mostly due to the plot because, and I guess to finish an earlier thought, those side missions and those odd jobs you take, you raise enough money to pay an entry fee to access each subsequent assassin boss battle.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's between each of those 10 boss fights, you're essentially raising money, upgrading your katana. You can buy other katanas in the first one, which is cool, which are basically just different movesets, and just getting ready for each subsequent boss battle. And the boss battles are crazy. They're the bosses are extremely colorful. Like you say, like, like the American stereotypes are really interesting because every boss like waxes poetic about like what death is and what I don't know. Again, it's been a long time since I played the first one. Not quite 2007, but like I was in high school when I played it, and I haven't since. But yes, the boss fights are very cool. There's a superhero. There's a guy that wields a revolver. The first boss fight is a guy that wields like a big like cloud strife buster sword.
Okay.
There's like an army girl with a false leg that throws grenades at you. Mm-hmm. You, spoiler alert, have a twin that you fight that's essentially the same as you. The boss fights are the highlight of the games by far, because that's where all the dialogue and character building and stuff is too. The rest of it, the hacking and slashing through waves of generic henchmen and the odd jobs, are fun and cute, but they're just a way to kind of pad out the game between the boss fights. And so, spoilers, yes, you make it to number 1 in the first game. Moving on to No More Heroes 2, Desperate Struggle, which was interestingly not directed by Suda51.
Oh,
and it sort of shows. I'm sorry that it's taking such a long time to get to the third one, but I feel like it's all necessary pretense to explain what's new about it, you know?
Yeah, I do feel like I'm learning things and we are building to something. So I'm trusting you on this journey, though.
Yes. And I think it's important because it is a legacy series. This is a series that's gone on a long time. Even though it's only 4 games long, which it's just interesting. It's in a weird place, like we talked about with The World Ends With You.
Sure. No
More Heroes 2. There's a lot that's similar. The combat's the same.
Also for the Wii.
Also for the Wii, yes. Came out like 3 or 4 years after. It takes place 3 years after Travis Touchdown has given up the title, but he is brought back into it when his friend is killed by an assassin.
Gotcha.
And so he enters the fold once again and has to clear the top 50.
Gotcha.
Which is maybe where you're getting your number.
Sure.
But that's essentially a fake out. There's 10 or so boss fights.
Interesting.
No More Heroes 2 is also very good. A lot of the same. The main interesting changes
Mm-hmm.
are that there are several playable characters.
Oh.
You don't.
I don't remember that.
You don't just play as Foulmouth Travis Touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Just story fights. You play as some of the characters from the first game, like some recurring characters.
Sure.
I guess a nice change of pace. But the main difference is that there's no open world.
Gotcha.
It is all menu based, for better or for worse.
Wow. Well, and so I was surprised to hear you say that the first one was open world, because my understanding of the series was that was the standard. Was that it was kind of like limited, kind of mini worlds, you know what I mean?
Like, just like a hub world, kind of?
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing is, like, it's hard to say what's better, because it's also hard to articulate just how wrapped up the entire series and individually each game is in its own style, its own aesthetic, its own presentational proclivities. Whew. Talk about waxing poetic.
Nerd.
But truly, like the open world in the first game, it's empty and it sucks, but it's not an accident.
Yeah.
You know, it's
part of the vision.
Yeah, and it does make the world feel a little more alive.
Sure.
It's boring because there's nothing in the map to explore, really.
Mm-hmm.
You can explore the city and you can look at it all, but there's nothing to interact with, and there's nothing that you're, like, missing. It's just a way to get from point A to point B. You hop on your motorcycle or run around the city to get to the next mission, and that's all it amounts to.
Sure.
And so, in a way, for No More Heroes 2, to take that out just kind of streamlines it a little more. Yeah. You know, it takes away some of the fluff. It makes it the experience a little more direct. It gets you to the combat. That's the fun part. It's more
action, less
definitely
adventure.
Exactly. And it just, like, gets you to the meat of it a little more quickly. But certainly it's a little more detached as a result, for better or for worse. So, I mean, that's the thing. 2 is the same missions, same side jobs, same ranking fights.
Which, and I mean, is more or less to be expected. Like, they didn't skip a generation or anything. It's the same hardware they're working with.
Still on the Wii.
It is interesting that you mentioned, like, it's not Suda 51. Mm-hmm. But, you know, regardless, it could have been the same teams, the same hardware, it's not like they had much room to grow, necessarily.
Right.
But yeah, there's a 2.5 or something, right?
Yes, this is where it gets really tricky, because I haven't played 2.5.
Okay.
A few years ago, a while after No More Heroes 2, for the Switch, we got Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes.
That's right.
Which is, like a 2.5 sort of... Okay, so here's the thing. I absolutely should have played Travis Strikes Again before I played No More Heroes 3. Uh-huh. But I didn't think I needed to. Yeah. Because there's 1, 2, and 3, and then there's this weird spin-off in the middle that also plays completely differently. Travis Strikes Again is like a top-down gauntlet-style game.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, like Four Swords Adventures or something?
Yeah.
Kind of.
I mean, it's a genre, and I'm failing to think of examples, but...
Right. But Travis Strikes Again came out on the Switch exclusively, initially, and I've always meant to play it. I should have played it when it came out. I don't know why it escaped me. But it plays completely differently. Obviously, it's not No More Heroes 3 titularly. Mm-hmm. I figured it was a spin-off, but the plot and, like, even the way that the game mechanics kind of change and develop is affected by it. Mm-hmm. And so I should have played it. My mistake for not.
Dumb.
Yes, very much so. But it looks cool, and maybe we should play it because it's co-op too. That's one of the big things. I definitely intend to revisit it someday. But yes, that brings us to No More Heroes 3. And worth mentioning too, that Travis Strikes Again, at that time, we didn't know that No More Heroes 3 was coming.
Sure.
For all we knew, that kind of was...
That was the new direction for No More Heroes.
Right. Obviously, it had a spin-off air to it because it played differently and it had a weird subtitle kind of thing. Uh-huh. But yes, all I have to say, a lot of precedent for No More Heroes 3, a lot of history, a lot of room for improvement in a lot of ways, and we finally got it just recently.
And so, you've mentioned a couple games here, but I've detected like a through line of kind of irreverence and mature kind of gore and stuff, you know what I mean? And so, like, would you say it carries on like the spirit of No More Heroes? Is Suda51 involved in No More Heroes 3?
Yes, he directed No More Heroes 3.
Okay.
It is as irreverent as ever, but there is reverence for its legacy. in spades. It is so far up its own butt about the No More Heroes series that like it's not even funny. Like, which is why I was confused about your word choice.
Yeah, but like you say, it's not even funny. Is it not even funny?
Oh, it's funny. It's hilarious.
Okay, good.
But like it's like the amount of like fan service for like, and I'll like, yes, it's a legacy series. Yes, it has a reputation. Yes, there is like, but like the amount of like, I don't know, the true like fan service, just like returning characters and stuff that like didn't need to happen. I don't know. It's gratuitous is the word I would use.
Okay, beautiful.
For just about everything that happens in it and everything that is included in it. And that's not necessarily a negative.
Sure.
It's gratuitous in an amazing way. I'll start with the outset. So the intro to this game, the intro cinematic when you first start up the game, is the same as the reveal trailer from when it was first revealed at E3 2019, I think.
Okay.
And it's this 2 to 3 minute long cinematic. It's an anime cinematic. About this young boy. It's basically if Hayao Miyazaki, like Studio Ghibli, made E.T.
Oh. It's
this young boy on an island, an alien crash lands near him, and it's like this cute little alien buddy that he makes. It's mostly told in montage, but it's like this whole like lavishly animated anime sequence where this boy makes friends with this alien and they like grow up together a little bit and the FBI is after him, but he hides the alien and they build like a secret clubhouse in the woods, and then eventually the alien, whose name is Fu and the boy's name is Damon, Fu is like, I love you, Damon. In 20 years, I'm gonna return. And I'll be back, and then we can be best friends forever. And he they repair his ship, and they send him off. And then 20 years pass, and Damon is this like Jeff Bezos, super successful businessman.
Cool.
And and he's like a smooth operator type. Fu lands in his big building, and Fu is like a frat douchebag alien king. And he's like, but it's just absurd. And obviously Travis is nowhere to be seen yet.
Yeah.
But Fu just announces his plan to Damon to conquer the world. He brings some alien buddies back with him. Damon says, Fu, what are you? And Fu says, I'm a goddamn superhero. And then the title goddamn superhero appears on the screen. And it shatters, and Travis rides in on his motorcycle and is like, No More Heroes 3! Oh, I wish I had the case with me, because the reversible cover for the Switch case, like the little like Switch game case, is for goddamn superhero. It's like an alternate like game completely.
Oh my god.
It's just stupid.
That's so cool though.
It's absurd. And that was how it was introduced at E3 2019 with zero pretense. Like, there's gonna be this game, goddamn superhero, but then no psych. No More Heroes 3. Right. Amazing. It was awesome when it was revealed. So that's the intro cinematic. There's so much fluff to this game. There's so much outside of the hack and slash gameplay that just like can't be done justice with words. You play through this whole intro sequence where it's this old retro arcade beat 'em up that Travis loved called Deathman. And you finish this whole sequence, and then Travis wakes up like it's like a dream sequence, and Fu shows up and kills a bunch of his friends.
Travis's friends,
like recurring characters from the previous game. One of them being someone that was introduced in Travis Strikes Again, so I was like, what's going on? Sure, why not? And weirdly enough, a character that was killed in No More Heroes 2 is just like back.
Oh.
For no reason.
Okay. And
another recurring character is also back, but looks and completely different and has a completely different voice. Just weird. I don't know.
There's like no telling what the origin of that kind of like decision making was, whether it was Travis Strikes Back or...
No, but there's so much calculated style to all of it that it's hard to say that it could have been an accident.
Sure.
It was obviously intentional for some reason. Suda51 is just a certifiable insane man. But that wraps up in Travis's conquest to defeat the top 10 alien assassins, intergalactic assassins rather, avenge his friends, and defeat Prince Fu and save the world. So That's the big thematic and stylistic difference this time around, is it's not humans, it's not like fountains of blood, it's aliens. It's all aliens, and the alien designs are awesome.
But, and they vary throughout the game?
Oh, big time. They're just like a random jumble of the most garish opposing color schemes and like geometric compositions that you can imagine, kind of. Like, they remind me of, did you ever play El Shaddai?
I watched you play it quite a bit.
A lot of the enemy designs remind me of that. And, like, they're humanoid, but they're just very, extremely abstract.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know, they feel very alien, but they all have, like, very silly, over-the-top personalities and stuff.
Right.
How am I doing so far?
Oh, you're doing fine. I can't tell if you're satisfied with No More Heroes 3, though.
I am.
Okay.
I am. Oh, big time. I think. Well,
cool. Fun.
So, the open world is back.
Okay, nice.
Kind of.
For better or worse.
Kind of nice. For better, for worse. It's just, again, inexplicable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not much more filled out than it was in the first one.
Gotcha.
It's not much more fun to explore. There's a few more, like, collectibles and stuff. There's a little more reason to explore the nether regions of the map.
Yeah.
There are places to plant trees that you can use to acquire in-game currency.
Okay.
You can collect scorpions to give to a guy that makes ramen. I mean, everything is basically to get, like, currency and such. But there's, like, collectibles and things that you can find around the map. In addition to the classic, at this point, odd jobs. And in this game, they are defense missions.
Oh, against, like, alien invasion?
Yeah, exactly. They're the same thing. They're just, like, waves of alien henchmen. But, like, yes, defense missions. And also, in addition to acquiring an entry fee for each assassination ranked battle, you have to conquer specific designated matches against alien henchmen, essentially, before each battle. It has a big world map, and it's split up into several sections, several themed sections.
Okay.
But it's bizarre because you can see the entire map, and there's Stand to Destroy, and there's a few different sections. Like, one is called Perfect World, and it's a pleasant neighborhood with, like, quaint music. And then there's one called Call of Battle. That's just an abandoned war zone, a la Call of Duty. There's one called Thunderdome that's essentially just a barren desert.
Okay.
Just weird themed sections of the open world.
Sure.
Still equally as empty of things to do, essentially. But the weird thing about the world map is that there are, like, you can see the entire world map and these different sections to it, but there are clearly, like, I'd say almost 40 to 50% of the map is just, like, blocked off. It's prohibited. Invisible walls, essentially.
Does the map display that? Where the walls are?
Yeah. Like, you can see the map. And you can see, like, all of it. Like, it's a map.
Yeah.
Like a map you'd see of America.
Sure.
But just, like, imagine if, like, the entire, like, northwestern quadrant of America was just blocked off and inaccessible.
I see what you mean.
So it's just, like, very clearly carved off, like, this is
Select
the area.
areas.
Yeah, this is the area where you play, and that's it. Which is also for better or for worse. Because, I mean, like, all that shit's going to be empty anyway.
Sure.
It's just interesting. It's weird. It's like, why bring back the open world? But also, I'm glad you brought back the open world because it, like, is silly and you just might as well.
It adds to the context,
Definitely.
I'm sure.
It adds so much flavor to the game that is necessary. I don't know, maybe not necessary, but, like, appreciated.
How does the combat hold up from a Wii motion-centric combat system to what I can assume is, like, I don't know, they have to rely on the joysticks now?
For the most part, in a similar way to, I would imagine, like, in a similar way to Skyward Sword.
Careful.
Sorry, spoilers. Yes, because it can be played in mobile mode, you can use the motion controls if you're playing, like, on the TV or in, like, an docked mode. But if you're playing portable mode, you can use the sticks.
Okay.
Same thing.
Nice.
Essentially. But the combat is almost the same. It's the same light and heavy attack kind of thing. You stun your enemies, you use wrestling moves on them, which is satisfying as ever. Same slash reel, the roulette, you can gain currency through it. One of the main changes is that you only use one katana through the game.
Okay, there's no, like, upgradable weapons or changeable movesets, I guess?
Right. You can upgrade your stats and also, like, purchase some new maneuvers.
Uh-huh.
But you only have one central moveset through the whole game.
Gotcha.
For better or for worse.
Mm-hmm.
As is customary at this point.
Yeah.
But the main addition is the Death Glove, which is apparently carried over from Travis Strikes Again.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially 4 different, like, spells, kind of.
Okay.
Just 4 different cooldown abilities that you have.
Yeah, gotcha.
One is Death Kick. It automatically teleports you to the enemy and delivers, like, a kick that pushes them away.
Uh-huh.
One is Death Shower. It's like an area of effect that just, like, rains damage on them over time.
Yeah.
One is Death Slow, that slows down your immediate area so that you can time things better.
Mm-hmm.
And one is Death Force, that pushes enemies like a force push into
Gotcha.
other enemies. So that's essentially it. That's the main addition to the combat.
Gotcha. So if I use, like, Death Force, would all 4 of those be on cooldown? Or...
They're separate.
So interesting. You can chain each one appropriately, like,
oh boy,
back to back
howdy.
and stuff.
And that's where the combat, it's hard to, it wasn't accidental because it's all in there.
Uh-huh.
And there's so much fine tuning of so much of the aesthetic that, like, it can't possibly be accidental. But there's just, like, some weird idiosyncrasies to the combat that feel overlooked.
Huh.
When the combat at its best is you use Death Force to push your enemy farther away. Then you use Death Kick to teleport to them immediately.
Yep.
Then you use Death Slow to slow them down.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use Death Rain so that they're getting damaged while they're slowed down. And then you start hacking away at them.
Sure.
Then you get them stunned. And then you grab them and you toss them.
Uh-huh.
Wow! I completely forgot something that has been essential to the entire series up to this point.
What's that?
Charging your blade.
Oh,
Do you remember?
right.
You remember this? This is one of the. I mean, it's one of the most iconic parts. One of the most iconic aspects of the entire franchise.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about already?
Yeah.
So your beam katana can run out of energy. This is across all the games.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe I forgot this. Your beam katana has a battery, and as you use it to attack, and as you block, it can run out of battery, and if you run out of battery, you're screwed.
Uh-huh.
You can't block or attack, and you're
The
extremely
beam won't
vulnerable.
appear.
The what?
The beam won't appear.
Right, exactly. It shuts off. But you can recharge it by pressing a button and shaking the Wii remote. I mean, just to be blunt about it, it's supposed to look like jacking off.
Yeah, shake weight.
Yeah, it's supposed to look like a shake weight. Right, exactly. That's what I meant.
Yes.
You can edit that however you want. But
that is intentionally
right. It's
suggestive
it's crude and meant to be
get you looking dumb in front of your TV.
Exactly. And that's what Travis does on screen too. Like when you press the button and he starts like shaking his sword like up and down. He's like, "Come on, come on!"
Right in front of him.
Exactly. Yes. So, and that's been a central mechanic of the series since the beginning, as a joke, kind of, but also strategic. Like you have to find the right moments in combat to recharge your sword, and like there are upgrades to make your sword battery higher and such. But all that to say, in No More Heroes 3, this flow of combat, you use your Death, Force, Kick, Slow, Rain, land some hits on them while they're slowed down, grab them. When you throw an enemy, it recharges your battery. Okay. And that's essential. Mm-hmm. That's the flow. You don't have to pause the combat to to run away and charge your beam.
I wish you could see what he's doing with his hands as he's talking.
A lot of simulated shaking weight.
He's charging his blade a lot.
Yes. But that's the flow, is like the better you perform, the better you're using these abilities, and the more damage you're racking up, the more you can continue your combo, so on and so forth. It's and obviously, like the video you've seen, and I'm sure the video will post on the Instagram soon. Uh-huh. Check out NintenGem's podcast on Instagram.
Ayo.
It's flashy, crazy, over-the-top, stylish, just nonsense to look at. It's chaos, but it's extremely visually satisfying.
Yeah.
My roommate Nick walked in, and I was like, "Can you tell what's going on?" And he was like, "No, but it looks so cool." But that's where things come in, like those weird, like almost holes in the combat, the idiosyncrasies I was talking about. When you do a perfect dodge and time slows down, you are invulnerable to all attacks.
Gotcha.
But not when you use Death Slow. But if you dodge an attack while you're in Death Slow, if you perfect dodge, then it slows down even more. But then you can't really tell which slow effect is like taking place.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Sure.
There's just like little holes in it like that. Like, and I don't know. I was just talking about this game so long, but there's just so much to it. Because all the boss fights also break all the rules. In their own way. There is a boss fight that is musical chairs. There is an turn-based RPG boss fight. It's a crazy game.
Do they all tie in like the action swordplay to some degree, or is like the RPG fight like literally
The RPG fight is followed by a proper boss fight. Mm-hmm. So they do. And that's one of the cool things about this game too, is that you can go back and replay boss fights. There's a time machine in your house, in your apartment, where you can replay old boss fights. That's another weird thing in this game too, is there's crafting. You can craft chips for your death glove to give you different stat boosts.
Gotcha.
But boss fights and general assassination missions give you materials to craft these things.
Yeah.
I don't think No More Heroes needed a crafting system, but whatever. But essentially you can grind the boss fights to get more stuff. Yeah. I don't know how much more to address about it. How much more is worth addressing without it being gratuitous itself. But just for posterity, the structure for a general chapter in No More Heroes 3 starts with an anime intro sequence. The same one for each chapter, after each boss fight. Like a retro anime sequence.
Yeah.
That has like the opening credits. And then that is followed by a cutscene of Fu introducing the next ranked boss fight. And then you are plopped into your apartment where you take care of things, you can change clothes, and then you can do all the designated matches and raise your coins, all the open world stuff. And then is the boss fight. Almost all the boss fights are either these weird like pseudo battles, like the RPG one, or the musical chairs champion.
Yeah.
Or, and this is also a trope in the No More Heroes series, is there a fake out boss? Like this massive alien assassin threat is introduced, and then they're destroyed before you even get to touch them. And like a legacy recurring character appears, and it's
that's cool.
It happens a lot. It's cool, but it's also like, all right, that boss looked cool. I would have loved to fight them, but I guess we're doing this now.
Sure.
At this point, that's a staple of No More Heroes. But yeah, you fight the boss, and subsequently there's also an anime outro, an ending credits.
Yeah, nice.
The same song, the same sequence. Like,
so each one really has like a whole theme tied to it and stuff.
Essentially, like it is all very bookended, very well, like chapter based. And like, I mean, there's no point to me verbally explaining the aesthetic of all this stuff, but my goodness, I don't know, man. The main conclusion I want to draw is that it's really hard to recommend this to anyone that hasn't played the first two.
Sure.
Because it's so reliant on tropes and standards set from the first two games.
Which isn't impossible to recommend, though, at this point, because they have put the first two games on the Switch eShop.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and
they are playable in today's day and age.
I would certainly recommend starting with the first one and seeing how you feel, and if you enjoy the series, if it ends up being your kind of thing, playing through all of them, because 3 is certainly a very rewarding experience, especially if you've played the first few. Like it's a wonderful conclusion to the series, and all that precedent being set, like all the explanation for the first two games feeling necessary just because of this feels like the ultimate culmination for all of it.
Sure. Yeah.
It feels like a worthwhile ride.
And like a package deal.
Yes,
at this
completely.
Point.
For sure. You could start, and you could, if you really bothered to start with this one, but it would be really hard to go back to the first two.
Sure. How long are these games? And how long is like 3?
I got through No More Heroes 3 in 25 hours.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And there's still, I'd say I probably got through like half of all the side content. But the rest of the side content is just like the regular like hack and slash missions.
Yeah, horde missions and stuff.
And at this point, I'm also like, all of my skills are upgraded enough that they are the earlier level, the lower level missions too. So like they would kind of just be trivial anyway.
Yeah.
I feel like I've had to do like a series retrospective along with this game.
Well, I feel equally bad making you say as many words as you did. I think you did a great job getting us through like the series and giving, especially like new players, you know what I mean? Somebody who may not know whether they wanted to try it or not, giving them a good taste of what it's like. So
it's a weird sell. I think the thing is that No More Heroes 3, like on the eShop, just like to the layman, looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Because along with like all the alien stuff, like this one is just like extremely colorful and bright.
Yeah.
And aesthetically pleasing to look at, while the others were, for as over the top and stylized as I made them sound, they were grittier than this one.
Mm-hmm.
It was just worth noting. If any of this, if any of my rambling sounds appealing, certainly start with the first one. You owe it to yourself to give it a shot. I think it's like $20 on the eShop, and it was a Wii game, and it's a small game now.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth dipping your toes into. They're all unique experiences, and nobody can crank out a weird opus like Suda 51, truly. Are you going to start No More Heroes yet?
You have me wanting to, genuinely.
Go for it.
I'm a little nervous now that like I do have 3 games worth of like potentially similar content.
Certainly.
You know what I mean? And I want to start with 3 because theoretically the gameplay should be the best, but I won't get all the references. So, I'm a little torn.
And the illustration of the precedent necessary also because, like, I don't know, I guess I've already kind of said it, but the changes in the gameplay alone, too, are worth experiencing in sequential order. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But yeah, I recommend it. I mean, I know I'm more into, like, the niche weird stuff, but give it a shot.
Uh-huh.
What you been playing?
I've been playing games. I've been playing, like, casual, like, normie games.
That's awesome. Good for you. What kind of normal games have you been playing?
Definitely on the more casual side. The heavy hitter Nintendo side. I've been playing The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD in particular. Obviously, Skyward Sword's been around for a little while now, so we're going to kind of classify it as our gem for the episode. Mm-hmm. But it did just get a re-release for the Nintendo Switch back in July. And so I'd only played it once prior to that. It was on the Wii, and so I picked up the HD version and got through it.
What'd you think?
I have very interesting thoughts on Skyward Sword. I think a lot of people kind of do, which we can get into it, but
it's certainly the most divisive of all, especially 3D Zeldas, I guess, mostly is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, probably so. I think that's a very fair statement.
But I have noticed in the interim, in the meantime, in the reaction to Skyward Sword HD, how many people have like been trying it again and appreciating it.
Yeah. Before we really start getting into it, I kind of want to give the same preface that we gave to the Breath of the Wild episode, in that like this game has been out for a while. It's a Legend of Zelda game, so like it's been picked apart to shreds.
Sure.
It like, you know what I mean? It is nothing but a skeleton now.
I don't know. I
criticized skeleton. And so like I more or less I just want to give my perspective on it, my own gameplay experiences, and obviously I want to get yours cuz you've played it as well.
Yeah, but I would say that like before this HD re-release, this is like probably the least played 3D Zelda also.
I'd say that's a fair call.
Like I'm all for this format, this kind of open discussion format, but like it's certainly not as ubiquitous as Breath of the Wild, even still after this HD re-release.
Oh, not at all. It was for a long time until Breath of the Wild, the newest 3D Zelda game that you could play. It was for the Wii, and so the Wii U came and went without any new Zelda games. Obviously, there was Wind Waker HD,
and Twilight Princess HD.
And Twilight Princess HD, yes, thank you. But there was no new Zelda game, as usually there is for a Nintendo console. So for a long time, it reigned supreme as newest, at the very least. Perhaps not everybody's favorite. And that's for like a lot of interesting reasons. I think the easiest to point out is just the control scheme.
Certainly.
But of course, Nintendo wants to show off like their cool new hardware, which at that point wasn't new. Skyward Sword was a late Wii release.
Super late for the Wii, but the Wii Motion Plus had been out for a little bit. That's kind of what stalled Twilight Princess's development too. Was like they wanted to add all the Wii Motion or the Wii remote motion gameplay to it.
Right.
But the Wii Remote, as it stood, couldn't really track like one-to-one sword swinging, which is why they added the Wii Motion Plus accessory peripheral, I guess you'd call it.
Sure.
Which made Skyward Sword doable,
right?
Creatable.
For those who haven't played it, perhaps, really a huge feature of the sword play, the combat, was that you really did have to aim your sword swings, whether it was horizontal, vertical, or a permutation of the two, a diagonal axis. And there was even like a jab that you would have to utilize sometimes, like for a giant spider's eye or an opening in the enemy's abdomen. And so the directional input of your sword swing was key to the gameplay. With that was kind of... It's fairly divisive about whether or not it was well implemented, whether it was fun, which it's a big question. And I have to say, I think it's fun at the very least. After a while, like having to focus on that can get a little wearing. But overall, it's definitely an interesting addition to like the Zelda swordplay.
Sure.
It carried over pretty well onto the Switch HD remake. It works pretty well with the Joy-Con when you're playing on the screen, and even using the joysticks, as I primarily did, playing handheld, that generally worked pretty well. It felt good.
Well, and that's kind of my question, is just having not played the new Switch version in any capacity. I played, like you said, I played it twice on the Wii in the past few years, or like since it came out, rather. But is the swordplay, well, obviously the swordplay feels different, not swinging your Joy-Con around. They found a way to make it work with using directional inputs on the joystick, like the right joystick.
Right.
Does the swordplay still feel... I don't know. Obviously, it was a gimmick with the motion control. It was to make you feel like you were swinging the sword. Uh-huh. When it doesn't feel like that anymore, does it still feel fun and like it's like a whole swordplay system worth adapting? Because it ultimately just kind of... When you map it to a button like that, it ultimately just kind of boils it down to just directional inputs for attacking, right? Like, is that still satisfying?
See, I don't know if this is a side effect of me preferring to play in handheld mode or not, but I actually think it feels kind of like less intrusive and a little more well ingrained into the gameplay when I'm not having to... I don't know, motion games are super fun and cool, but it does kind of feel like it interrupts my gameplay a lot of times when I'm having to use my whole body. And so, like,
absolutely.
To have it really that tight and effective just to be tied to a joystick, I have to say felt pretty good. However, the trade-off is you cannot control your camera with that stick.
Right.
And so the whole time you're having to hit the left trigger to like refocus the camera. That was a pretty sharp trade-off there that definitely took some getting used to.
However, worth noting, you couldn't freely control the camera in Skyward Sword originally anyway.
Of course.
Because of, the Wii
same
Remote
issue.
Nunchuck. Yeah, more or less.
Compared to most 3D games nowadays, where you have full reign of the camera, you can swing around whenever you need to. If you're turning around, you know what I mean, just move your camera. It definitely it feels a little clunky, especially in the beginning. And now that I'm like done playing it and I've moved on to other 3D games, it's like I'm having to reacquaint myself with
free camera control.
Exactly.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We won't talk about this, but I'm playing Spyro Reignited right now. I'm playing the first one, and like genuinely there was a few minutes learning curve. It's like, oh yeah, I can look where I want to.
Dang. Yeah, I never really thought about that. I mean, I knew that the right stick was used for the sword orientation now, but I didn't think about... I just kind of figured they also implemented 360 camera movement as well. Uh-huh. Because that's how both Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD were on the Wii U, too. Like, obviously, there wasn't quite the same sort of right stick camera movement. Like, that's kind of how all classic 3D Zelda games are. You do like use the Z targeting or L targeting to center your camera. Mm-hmm. But in the HD remakes, they did kind of have like full 3D camera control.
Right.
Just kind of adapting with the times. But I guess that does make me think, though, if you're playing on the TV and using the Joy-Con, the motion controls, can you use the right stick for the camera then?
Yes, you can.
Oh, that's weird.
I know.
That is strange.
And so that's where my, the dissonance comes in a little bit. It's like
for sure.
Like I always say, I am 95% handheld. So I really didn't even get that experience too much. But and also, this is going to be a great kind of transition into our next point of discussion. Coming off of our Breath of the Wild episode and having played Breath of the Wild, it was interesting having to transition to an older control scheme. Breath of the Wild is so fluid, and obviously the most recent entry into 3D Zelda and like just the new standard, it seems. But as we discussed in our Breath of the Wild episode, Skyward Sword was very much like a stepping stone for a lot of the mechanics to be incorporated.
The stamina meter.
Yeah, the stamina meter is pretty damn clunky.
Really?
I think so. Well, and just, it's interesting, there's no expansion to it. Like, it never grows. You definitely rely on that stamina fruit, that perfectly placed stamina fruit that Nintendo placed just at the end of your stamina meter's distance.
If you're running straight the way.
Exactly. Following the path up the hill, the stamina fruit is like just exactly the distance you need.
Well, that's exactly something that I was imagining when I was thinking of the stamina meter. There's one section on Death Mountain where you're running up an incline.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to fight the slope, and you have to aim for the different stamina fruits to keep your stamina up as you climb up.
Exactly.
I don't know, is that clunky, or is it just kind of like an extra layer to the general traversal? I don't know.
Well, and so that's hindsight is 2020. I mean, it's clunky as heck hopping off of Breath of the Wild and going back to play Skyward Sword.
Sure.
But at the time, I mean, that was an entirely new feature for Zelda. Sprint was starting to make the rounds across the gaming universe. If you didn't have Sprint in your game, it's boring and old. And so, they managed to incorporate that into Zelda. And, I mean, at the time, it was pretty revolutionary, kind of. Same with the sailcloth. You can totally see the origins of the Breath of the Wild. I don't think they call it the sailcloth anymore. They might.
I think it's the paraglider.
Yeah. But regardless, you can't actually aim where you're flying with the sailcloth.
The sailcloth really isn't even anything in Skyward Sword. Barely.
It's just a means to not take fall damage.
Right.
And / fly up when there's a gust of a geyser of air or something like that. But you can see kind of just what they were starting to think about for Breath of the Wild. All that said, I'm making it sound like hindsight is 2020. I did have a lot of these same feelings the first time I tried Skyward Sword, because the first time I tried it,
Before Breath of the Wild.
Before Breath of the Wild, yes, back when it first came out. Because, I mean, I tried it and then didn't finish it.
Right.
Do you remember that? I said, I don't like this, and I didn't make it past the first forest area.
Right. Because so much of this was already such a departure from previous Zelda games, too. The stamina wheel and stuff, it's weird how chronologically, at this point, Breath of the Wild is kind of bookended by Skyward Sword.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Before, at least, and especially before the sequel comes out. Skyward Sword was, like we've just kind of discussed, the stepping stone towards Breath of the Wild in some ways, with the sailcloth and the stamina meter and, I don't know, the way some items work in general traversal sometimes.
Sure. Collectibles, crafting.
Yeah. Big time. That's a good point. But also, Skyward Sword was that stepping stone towards Breath of the Wild in some ways, but now it's also the stepping stone afterwards, kind of. Obviously Breath of the Wild is extremely different than previous 3D Zelda entries, but Skyward Sword was too.
Yeah.
Right after Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, it bucked a lot of the same trends in kind of an juxtaposing way than Breath of the Wild did.
Sure.
I'm kind of imagining a heart monitor where there's just a straight line. And then Skyward Sword kind of went up a little bit. And then Breath of the Wild went down all the way.
Yeah.
And then Skyward Sword kind of went up a little bit more. And then now we're going back to whatever's normal. I don't know. I feel there was a lot of consistency in the 3D Zelda series. Skyward Sword shook up the formula a little bit. Breath of the Wild shook up the formula even more in the opposite direction. And then now we're kind of back to Skyward Sword, hey, look where these things came from, sort of. Maybe we'll get back to normal, fever pitch, but we'll see from the Breath of the Wild sequel, I guess. But
right.
It's just weird that we think of Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker and Twilight Princess as these standards, these blueprints for how a 3D Zelda goes. But we haven't gotten that in a long time.
Yeah. Well, and again, great transition into the temples.
Right.
And so in our Breath of the Wild episode, we complained about, as everybody else does, there's no temples. There's only like 4 levels and all these mini shrines. Dungeons. Whatever.
Right.
No, there's some of them are temples.
Some of them
Skyward
are temples,
Sword.
but they're not all temples.
Yeah.
All temples are dungeons, but not all dungeons are temples.
Okay, touche. There you go. That's geometry for you.
There you are. There's polygraph test.
And so I've played Skyward Sword through once. I tried it once and I didn't finish it. And then I did pick it up a few years later and I got through it and I didn't hate it. Like I thought it was a good Zelda game, fun in the end. But now, again, with some good old 2021 hindsight. Wow. 10 easy ways to date your podcast. It's interesting to see that, like, Breath of the Wild wasn't necessarily the first Zelda game to start bucking the dungeon.
Like the segment and themed dungeons.
Right, that formula.
Right. Because Skyward Sword started to implement a lot of those same, like a lot of the elements of the dungeons into the overworld.
Yes. Well, and there's only 3 areas overall.
Right.
There's, you have the forest area, the lava mountain area, and then the desert area. Which the sort of 6, I guess, dungeons, all fall into one of those areas. And so, like, they were already working with, like, revisiting, old areas, and which would open up a new path. But, like, it feels kind of limiting now, looking back on it.
For sure. And that's another one of those areas. Skyward Sword deviated, and then Breath of the Wild deviated even more. Is that Skyward Sword was noticeably more linear than the previous entries.
Sure.
Just in terms of, like, the progression of how you go through the world, I guess. Like, I mean, let's face it, like, in terms of pure, like, central progression, the original 3D Zeldas were pretty linear. Like, there's not much deviation or, like, experimentation in how you can, like, you can't do the dungeons out of order, But Skyward Sword definitely, comparatively to the other ones, felt a lot more railroaded.
Yes.
And linear in its progression. And then, obviously, Breath of the Wild blew everything up and made it completely open.
Right.
Just do whatever you want in whatever order. Your choice. Don't worry
or
about
don't.
it. Or don't at all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just another way to see how Skyward Sword itself initially bucked the trend. Yes, that in a way that Breath of the Wild gets credit for, but in the opposite way.
Right, yeah.
Confusing stuff. But right, like you said, like you revisit the same areas and they change a little bit through the course of the game.
Which is interesting because start digging too hard, that's Wind Waker too.
Right, and Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
You got Zora's Domain, Unfrozen, and Frozen.
Yes, and so maybe there's some kind of like weird jaded nostalgia going into some of these newer games. I don't know.
I think when we get to talking about like the world design and the progression and how you kind of like backtrack through the same areas, that's kind of where we start to get into like what after playing through Skyward Sword for the first time and in retrospect, even in like post Breath of the Wild world. That's not post Breath of the Animal Crossing Wild World, but post Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild World.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we get into like what I consider to be the more objective flaws with the game, and that is like in how much familiar ground you retread, how much like backtracking through the same areas, how many repeated boss fights, which is almost a story spoiler, but like I don't know, going through the same themed areas, some of the same exact areas, like more than twice, and especially like that repeated boss fight,
right?
The imprisoned, just bad.
It's terrible.
Just not a great boss in the first place.
No,
but you do it 3 times through the course of the game for plot reasons, kind of, but like not a good enough reason to make you do it over and over. Which is, and all that repetition and addition, and again like. That sense of railroading is kind of where I feel like the game mainly suffers. Beyond like the divisiveness of like, do the controls work? Is this new format of dungeons and overworld like good or bad? Or is it just different that we're not used to?
Yeah.
Like the actual redundancy gets tiring, I feel like.
All that said though, I have to say like the story is one of, in my opinion, one of the better Legend of Zelda stories.
Absolutely.
Like, I can't say the world is one of the better worlds, but like Skyloft
Absolutely.
is cool and feels reminiscent of like sailing the Great Sea in Wind Waker, which was always a blast. But like context surrounding Skyward Sword and like the legend, the actual Legend of Zelda in this game, like the story they tell within about, and it's really good, actually.
I think the plot is super strong, and I think the storytelling is done. Like, the dialogue is good.
Yes.
Though, like, it's still... They're also at this weird precipice, too, where the cutscenes themselves are animated very well. Like, the expressions are very evocative. Like, there's a part where, like, I was close to tearing up where Link cried, and, like, I thought that was a very emotionally impactful. Like, the storytelling and the cutscenes is very effective and evocative. But they're still doing text boxes. Like, this is pre-Breath of the Wild, where they're not voice acting yet, but they're still tied to like these text boxes while like these choreographed cutscenes happen,
and like deep emotional expressions on these characters' faces. Like,
exactly. Like, there's acting happening.
Right. It is interesting. I don't love the character models in this game. I don't love the entire
aesthetic.
Yes. It's close to good. It's like I'm on board with like the bright colors and stuff, but it's like actually like it's a lot of the characters' faces I just find like straight up ugly, kind of, and I don't know what it is. I can't. It's like they kind of went with a lot of different styles or something for the characters.
Feels like Disney.
Yeah. Oh, I
mean, like,
wow. Okay.
A lot of comparison, like even the plot too. Like, I feel like it starts like a Disney movie, and like the character archetypes too.
Yeah.
But visually, character design wise, like it fails to straddle a line between like humanistic proportions and like cartoonish over the top.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of people when it came out were like, it's not Wind Waker, but it's not Twilight Princess.
Yeah.
It's somewhere weirdly in the middle, and it kind of vacillates pretty hard between the two. It is, and again, like we said, hindsight 2020, it's a style that I feel like Breath of the Wild perfected. Because Breath of the Wild is also cel-shaded and cartoony, but also like, I don't know.
They got the style consistent.
Yes, exactly. They're still like mostly human proportions, but there's also like the scientist character who I forget.
Yeah, and she's like a child.
Yeah.
But that's funny. I'm thinking of like the opposite. The I can't remember his name, but like the half cyborg dude that improves all your equipment.
Right.
That's the bazaar in Skyward Sword. He is like a huge giant thing, and like there have been those kind of characters in Zelda before, but he just like he does not fit in with the rest of the world.
I don't know. Yeah, like all the characters are very overly diversely proportioned to the point of like they seem inconsistent.
Yeah,
they don't feel like not all the characters feel like they belong to the same world.
Right.
Girahim rocks.
Girahim is by far one of my favorite Zelda enemies.
Hell yeah.
Of all time.
He's awesome.
He's
great.
Stylish. He's badass.
He's threatening.
He's creepy. Yes.
He like is a challenging. Like the first time he practically kicks your ass. The first boss fight.
His writing is incredible too.
Yeah.
He is an engaging villain, and actually, so spoilers if you haven't played it, this Ganondorf is pretty cool too. I have to say,
I love Demise.
He's okay. Yes, that's true.
Sorry.
You're not wrong. It's definitely Demise, because we can get into this chronologically. This is like the first Zelda game, right?
Something like that.
It's
pretty much, more or less,
according to the Hyrule Historia,
which was published like 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah. But so like Ganon isn't even like Ganondorf yet. You know, Ganondorf isn't even Ganon. That is, he's still Demise. He's just like this demonic force.
Yeah, like just this persistent evil entity that is plaguing the land.
But he does take the shape of Ganondorf, essentially. Yeah. Kind of as you envision him in Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, etc. Super Smash Bros. How about that?
Sure.
Super Smash Bros.
He is kind of like a weird composite of like Ganon and Ganondorf.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that they chose Demise as the name. Like there's just no true relation. While Link and Zelda are still there.
Right.
Demise is like this incarnation. It's like, you could have just said it.
They could, but I do, like, if I'm correct in that this is theoretically the first Zelda game, canonically, and stuff, like, they, I think it's neat that he has not reincarnated himself as a Ganon yet, as he's still, like, misunderstood and just, like...
He does feel more, like, primal.
Yes, thank you. There we go. That's exactly,
like, as, like, this kind of ambiguous, unformed evil force, kind of...
Yes, demise. Yeah. He is just, like...
And he's cool. He looks really cool. And his boss fight's awesome.
Yes, he is.
And also, I mean, like, spoilers while we're here, but, like, the fact that Girahim is, like, his sword and Fee is, like, awesome!
I had forgotten about that, dude, as I was playing through, and when he finally went back to be Demise's sword, oh my gosh. I was like, that is thematic gold.
Absolutely,
like, freaking gorgeous.
Brilliant. So sick.
Gotta give Skyward Sword props, like, where it's due. Like,
the storytelling.
It's a great Legend of Zelda. Yeah. Big fan.
We skipped over one of the big flaws that I hear is still there, though. Fee.
I've always loved Fee.
What? Really?
I've always loved Navi. I'm just like I've never ever had a problem with Zelda partners, and Fee I think is cool. I'm not even gonna lie. I think it is not great writing that, like, it is this computer-esque, probability producing character.
Sure.
It doesn't feel like a ancient power. It feels like a supercomputer.
Sure. Yeah. But, like, and Zelda is starting to do that a lot more, where, like, ancient technology is, like, futuristic, you know? Yeah. But I mostly mean, and, like, I like Fee too. I like conceptually, I think a extremely dry computer entity in your Master Sword. Like, there's one particular bit that I'm thinking of that's funny when you're looking for Groose or something, and you come across a Kikwi, like one of the little raccoon creatures. Yeah. And Fee pops out and is like, there's a 98% chance that this creature is not Groose. We should keep looking.
Yeah. I think Fee's hilarious.
But, I mean, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they did change this in the re-release, this HD remake, but she popped up all the time in the original. All the time. For everything you found. She was always reminding you of, like, I'm pretty sure, like, every time you restarted the game and you collected a new rupee, like, it would, like, remind you, like, what the different,
I remember that. That's definitely fixed.
Did you ever turn the game off?
Definitely.
Okay. Interesting.
And so let me ask, because...
And also the dousing is part of that.
Oof. Okay, yeah, dousing's weird. That's definitely... And same with, like, the spirit realm thing that you go to.
Oh, spirit realm thing's cool, though.
It's cool. It's cool, and it's a great concept. Mm-hmm. But it feels like a little shoehorned, and, like, I definitely didn't want to play each one of them. I'm like, it was the same, like, with Twilight Princess. Like, the wolf, you have to, like, collect those spirit drops and stuff.
Yeah, it feels like padding.
Yeah, and just kind of, it was more of a grind than an enjoyable portion of the game.
Sure.
But, yeah, the dousing, the spirit realm, they both kind of just feel like incomplete portions of the game that could have meant more to the final package, but then just, they either are incomplete or just...
They don't add anything.
Yeah.
They're not enjoyable particularly. They're just kind of something to make gameplay there. And my girlfriend has also been playing through Skyward Sword. She just finished this remake, and she also played it back on the Wii. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure I'd remembered her saying that Fee was just as insistent in this version as she was originally, but maybe I misremember.
Well, and one thing, I play with my volume down quite a bit because I do have other things going on in the room. And so, like, if at all, it's what you're talking about is just, like, Fee's option coming up. You know what I mean? Press down the down arrow to have Fee say whatever she was going to say. Right. Like, maybe I just didn't notice it. But I forced Fee interactions. I can't say, like, it felt intrusive at all or anything like that. At least in this new HD remake. I do recall the original complaints and relating to them somewhat.
Right.
Going back to the start of this discussion, Skyward Sword is a hyper-analyzed game.
Yeah, like, absolutely.
We're not offering any, like, groundbreaking revelations here, but definitely some, like, important takeaways, both, like, as a Zelda game, as a Nintendo game, as a video game in general, as part of, like, this huge, massive, important, culturally relevant series.
Right. Yeah. And, like, what it means going forward. Mm-hmm. Like, just, again, release-wise, chronologically, sandwiching Breath of the Wild, it's kind of forcing us to take a look at, like, what the evolution of Zelda looks like from now. Yeah. As we've already done with our Breath of the Wild episode, but I don't know. We're in a different place now already.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny. Quickly after releasing our Breath of the Wild episode, and I think this is the last time we'll, like, talk about a Zelda, perhaps, before Breath of the Wild 2. I saw someone refer to Breath of the Wild as a tech demo, which is more or less like a succinct way of saying what we kind of said in our episode.
Huh.
And so
It's pretty
funny.
loaded.
It's very loaded. But it's funny because I would have called Skyward Sword a tech demo for Breath of the Wild, but now, with that lens, I'm excited to see, as you said, it's a bookend on Breath of the Wild. Like, what is Breath of the Wild 2 going to be with Skyward Sword on one side, then Breath of the Wild? You know, what is this third iteration going to be like?
And I mean, that is essentially circling back to, like, whatever we talked about in the Breath of the Wild episode, which is, like, what's an improvement?
Mm-hmm.
How much more refined and streamlined can you make the experience?
Mm-hmm.
Because Skyward Sword, I feel like, in a way, like, in an abstract way, feels like a more cohesive and complete experience than Breath of the Wild does.
Yeah.
Just given, but that's given Breath of the Wild's pure openness and Skyward Sword's inherent linearity.
Yes.
But how much more directed, streamlined, linear, if you want to go that route, can you make a sequel to the Breath of the Wild before it's worse off? It's hard to gauge.
I had to get that out there before we, potentially don't have a Zelda discussion for a hot minute.
Sure,
but
I guess we'll see.
Anything else to add to Skyward Sword, to, Breath of the Wild, whatever?
Well, I did want to circle back. The visual direction. Because the visual direction I wanted to address again just because I haven't played this HD one, but something that I feel like you or our mom or someone that was in the room, I remember back in the day on the Wii version commenting on how the game looked blurry.
Huh.
And that is kind of intentional. Because the game is trying to evoke watercolor.
Oh, wow.
And I note that I still haven't played the HD version because I feel like even on the Wii version, that translated relatively well. Like, everything in the foreground was like normal 3D models. And obviously, like we've talked about, the aesthetic is very bright and colorful. Like, the colors are and like the textures are kind of blurry in themselves. But upon closer inspection, it's blurry because it's almost impressionistic.
Yeah.
In that regard, like, there's a lot of different colors making up other colors. Say, like, just for example, in the desert area, you look up in front of you and it's sand, but if you look down, it's like spots of purple and red and yellow, making up brown, kind of like, or like a sandy burnt sienna,
a watercolor patchworky.
Yeah, and the same goes for the backgrounds. Like, everything in the foreground is like obviously 3D modeled, and you can look down and the textures are kind of they're impressionistic like that, but as things shrink into the background, they become blurrier, but they kind of melt into this watercolory sort of
blur.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to avoid using the word blur, but like at its worst, it does just kind of look blurry and muddy and like a kind of blob of weirdly transitioning color, which is why I think especially on the Wii back in the day, it could have looked blurry. But all that being said, is my question being, like, does it translate in HD? I don't know. Did you notice anything like that?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. Even 20 years after the discovery of HD, it's a technology that is often lost on me. I mean, like...
Well, like, I guess you were also playing on handheld, like you said, a lot.
But even... So, I can see the graphical difference between Wind Waker and Wind Waker HD. Like, I do honestly see it. But by the same token, I'm like, is this what HD is? Is this all HD is? Kind of? And so, that's more or less my takeaway from, like, Skyward Sword 2. It's like, is this what people call HD? Okay, I mean, that's cool, I guess.
I'm charging up a sigh. I sigh because Wind Waker HD, in a lot of people's views, is not how you do an HD remake.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I know that was kind of just an example you were picking, but, like, there's a lot of analyzing to do there, so, like, why that may or may not be a great HD remake. Looks too different, looks not different enough in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it looks very different to me.
It does. It looks super different, and there's a lot behind that, but yeah. A lot of lighting and changes and texture changes and weird, like, the colors just are different completely different.
Yeah.
But again, I haven't seen Skyward Sword HD very much.
And so I may just be the wrong guy to ask. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
Fair enough.
I have to say, if all that said, if you have never played Skyward Sword, A, is worth playing, and B, is worth picking up for the Switch.
Yes, do pick it up for Switch. Obviously, it's a classic Zelda game. It's worth playing like they all are. For all of its flaws, even playing the Wii version back in the day, like the dowsing, the feed, the sometimes finicky motion controls, like even at its more unrefined point, I still walked away from it feeling like it was like a 7 or 8 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember distinctly thinking, like, I don't know if it's a great Zelda game, but it's still, like, even a not great Zelda game, like an exemplary video game in its own right, you know?
Yeah. And it is just fun.
Right.
Like, it's fun at the end of the day, so it's hard to argue with that.
It's that Nintendo polish we talk about.
Bajing. I wanted to sound. I just realized that I want a sound effect for Nintendo Polish.
Oh, absolutely! Oh, you got it.
I don't know if it's gonna be from my mouth or I'm gonna find it on the internet.
I'm gonna make it for you. What the hell are you talking about?
There's a Nintendo Polish sound effect, and stay tuned for it because it'll appear one day.
I got you.
All right,
I'll get on it right now.
Heck yeah!
Well, that's a good stopping point to remind me one last important thing about No More Heroes 3.
Ooh.
I promise. Last thing is that when I was going into the sequence about how the chapter, like the order of the chapters, how it starts with an anime thing, that anime intro is followed by a podcast. Travis and his friend have an anime podcast, and they talk about anime for like a minute or two before the game proper kicks in.
Or
yes, real anime, I think.
Wow.
They have a podcast. It's Travis and his best friend, who is one of these characters that I mentioned that died in an earlier game, and he's back for no reason. But it's Travis's best friend, and yeah, they have a podcast about this real life anime, or a Japanese film director, and they just talk about his movies. And it reminds me a lot of our show because they're just talking about it, like they're barely even analyzing. They're just like, that part was so sick in that one movie, and it's very authentic. It's the best voice acting that Robert Atkin Downes does for Travis Touchdown in the entire series.
I love it.
It's great. So if you want even more nerdy podcasting, check out No More Heroes 3. Anyway, that is our episode for today. Thank you for tuning into NintenGem's podcast. You could do us a super solid and follow us on your preferred podcasting platform of choice.
That's right.
Follow us on Spotify, like this episode, or save it, whichever one you do. Those are things that you can do on some things. Follow us on Instagram at NintenGems_podcast. Like us on Facebook. You can follow my musical exploits at weave.bandcamp.com. That's WEAV, or just search Weave on your streaming platform of choice. And I guess we'll just see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Connor.
And I'm Braden.
And this has been NintenGems. See you later.
It's been real.
Love you.